Joining us now live from Buckingham Palace is Royal Editor at TalkTV, Sara Hewson, to take us through some of the events, not just overnight, but of course that we'll see down in London today, and movements of the King. Sara, welcome. Just before we go into where the King will move to today, let's go back to last night, and it's called the Vigil of the Princes that we saw there at St Giles in Edinburgh. Explain that a little bit more.
Vigil of the Princes, now Vigil of the King. It is a tradition, doesn't date back as far as many that we've been seeing over the course of the last few days. It dates back to the 1930s and the death of King George V, the Queen's grandfather. And it is a tradition whereby princes and Princess Anne, in this case, stand guard around the coffin of the monarch. And it was also repeated most recently in 2002 for her Queen Mother. But if you look at the newspapers here in the UK today, there is one image that dominates every single newspaper, including the Financial Times, and that is of King Charles there standing in front of his mother's coffin. And one of those images, you see the crown of Scotland just behind him. 500 years old, and he talked yesterday about the weight of history, and you can see that written all over his face. And Peter, watching those images as they stood, pause 10 to 15 minutes in silence, contemplating what had happened, you couldn't help but think about the King's life and how much it has changed in the course of a few days. And his schedule has been relentless. There has been no time to stop, to breathe, to grieve. And I think in that moment, albeit in a very public space, but a very sacred space, he was able there to think about his mother and what lies ahead for him as well.
Just to amplify Sarah's point, I've got some headlines here, hopefully you can see them. You know, we will watch over you, says the Mirror. The Queen's Guard, the Times, it's replicated this imagery of all the papers. And I think, Sarah, you make the point, we can't forget in all of this, this is, yes, a nation mourning, but this is a private family event as well. This is a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother. We saw today, and yesterday, the politics of Scotland sort of loom large in the King going there for the ceremonies and getting the keys to Edinburgh. Of course, today he'll move to Northern Ireland, and there's no one in the world who doesn't understand the history there of Northern Ireland. Help us understand what he will do there, because I didn't appreciate myself, Northern Ireland's only been in existence for about 100 years, of which 70 of those 100 years they've only known Queen Elizabeth.
And as Prince Charles, he had visited Northern Ireland 40 times. This is going to be his first visit as king. Monarchy, a divisive issue in Northern Ireland, but the Queen, renowned for having played a really significant part in reconciliation and attempts at peace, with 2011 with her visit to Ireland, to Dublin, bowing her head in the Garden of Remembrance. A year later, shaking hands with Martin McGuinness, the former IRA commander. And Prince Charles shook hands with Gerry Adams as well. And they have their own personal history, of course.
Yes, remind Australians too, the Mountbatten history, particularly for the now King, is very, very personal.
Earl Mountbatten, the Duke of Edinburgh's uncle, and someone to whom King Charles, then Prince Charles, was extraordinarily close. He was seen as his guide. He was murdered by the IRA, and so there's a deeply personal history. But you saw back in 2011 and 2012 the Queen put that personal history to one side. And although she rises above politics, this issue of soft diplomacy deployed to great effect. And the gestures that she made, not just the words when she spoke in Irish at a dinner held in her honour, but the gestures that she made, bowing her head in the Garden of Remembrance as well, seen as extraordinarily powerful. And I think no matter what the sentiments are, nationalist sentiments, sentiments towards the monarchy, that is put on hold today as King Charles is welcomed, and they remember the Queen and the role that she has played.
We'll see more of this play out over the next few days, but of course last night we saw all of her children except the Duke of York in military uniform, and there is obviously an ongoing military connection of many of the senior royals. They're obviously doing other things in public life. help us understand the significance of the particular uniforms worn.
Yes, so King Charles is wearing the uniform of a Field Marshal. It is a tradition for members of the royal family to be given honorary military titles. They have many of them. And Princess Anne, although not having served in the military, is wearing the uniform of a Rear Admiral of the Royal Navy. She has multiple titles, including Australian military titles as well. And they are she, the King, and Prince Edward, the Earl of Wessex, all seen in their military uniform, and they will be at all ceremonial events, including the funeral. The one person not, and the one out of them that has seen active service in the Falklands, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. But a decision taken yesterday that only working members of the royal family would wear a military uniform, with the exception of the vigil that is to take place on Friday in Westminster Hall around their mother's coffin again. On that occasion, he will be wearing military uniform, as we're told, a sign of respect to his mother.
I think of a lovely passage last night from the King's speech where he paraphrased Robert Burns. We know he's considered Scotland's national poet, the Baird, during a beautiful address at the Parliament. Take a listen.
If I might paraphrase the words of the great Robert Burns, my dear mother was the friend of man, the friend of truth, the friend of age, and guide of youth. Few hearts like hers with virtue warmed, few heads with knowledge so informed.
Of course, he had heather there in his lapel. The politics we talked about there of Northern Ireland, the politics, obviously, of Scotland, it was almost meant to be that the Queen passed away in Balmoral in these difficult times for the Union.
Yes, because these scenes that we witnessed last night and the ability of the people of Scotland now to pay their tribute until 5 o'clock this evening, when the Queen's coffin will be moved from Edinburgh and return to London, wouldn't have happened had she not died at Balmoral. We would always have had the visits by the King, Operation Springtide, to see him visit Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, but we wouldn't have had this public process of mourning in Scotland. She was Queen of Scots, he is King of Scots, and I think that this has been extremely powerful in a way in order to honour her in all parts of the United Kingdom.
I think there'll be a bit of consternation from the politicians on that one too, Sarah. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Sarah Hewson, for joining us once again.